Awesome to be the opening act. Yeah, I'm going to talk about space to play. I live on saltwater country, on the land of the Wadawurrung, people of the Conlan Nation, where sovereignty was never ceded. I play in the Wari, the ocean. I walk on the soft Kurak, the sand. And I'm speaking today on the lands of the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung peoples of the Conlan Nation. And I acknowledge and am ever grateful for the traditional custodians and elders of this land, past and present, for loving and taking care of country. I acknowledge their resilience, their knowledges, and their hurt. I extend my respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people present in the conference. First things first, show reel. Hi. Cheers. Thanks. My name is Conlan. Thanks to James and the Node team for having me. It's an incredible privilege to be a part of this festival. I still wear my Yes Captain beanie from the first Node every winter. And it's just amazing to have a motion conference like this, in Melbourne and in Australia. So if you see me around afterwards, definitely come around and say, hey, I want to meet as many people of you as possible. Play. I think something magic happens when we can somehow trick our brains into playing at work. It goes against logic. We have these constant crunching deadlines. We put this unrealistic expectations and pressure on ourselves, not to mention the pressure from clients and project leads, the team around you, producers. There's a process we follow to make sure everything stays on track, daily whip meetings and client check-ins. But it's not exactly conducive to play. None of these words really make me feel like playing. Deadline, client, whip. That's why they look so wrong in this typeface. I think that's why it's remarkable when it happens, when we can somehow, despite everything that goes against it, find play at work. Even if it's just for a brief moment, an afternoon here or there, where we can just lose ourselves and forget about that deck that's due tomorrow. I feel like when this happens, we can uncover the unexpected ideas, the weird, wild, and wacky things going on deep in our subconscious. The stuff that can actually surprise an audience and stick in their memory. That's what I'm searching for. Today, I want to talk about why embracing the chaos of play in our process can not only make work more fun, but it can also lead to unexpected and surprising results. First, I'm going to talk about how I found play at work. Then I'm going to talk about how to create the best environment for play. I'll talk through a couple of projects, future play at Future Deluxe, and finally how this can be extended into other aspects of work and life. I'm a motion designer for a 3D design studio called Future Deluxe, and at the moment I'm working remotely from Ocean Grove for the Sydney studio. Future Deluxe has 4 offices in Sydney, LA, London, and New York. Experimentation is at the core of Future Deluxe. It's one of the main principles behind the studio, and there's not many projects that don't go through some kind of R&D stage. I've been working at Future Deluxe coming up on 4 years across the London and then the Sydney studios. And it's been an incredible journey of just learning how to stretch a brief to its limit and embracing a healthy dose of chaos in the process. And just getting to work with a really kind, supportive, and friendly group of people. Discovery. So about 7 years ago, I was working at a branding agency called Future Brand in Melbourne, which was just down the road there. And we were given a brief to make 10 short films around superannuation, riveting topics like consolidating your super and retirement planning. I know what you're thinking. What fun. I wish I had that brief. Keep working in the industry and one day you probably will. There's a lot of superannuation companies. It was a time when a thing called Crazy Eights were all the rage. For all those who weren't working in branding back in 2015, Crazy Eights were this rip-off from Google where you fold a piece of paper into 8 squares and you've got a minute per square to sketch an idea. So it's ideation in this loose, quick, chaotic fashion. I was keen to try it out for animation and see if it would work. So I asked the design director at the time, Josh, if he would let me run with it, and he was keen. So I brought everybody into the studio who could spare half an hour, client service and designers, and we just ran a bunch of these crazy eights. First, we tried ways that could tie the 10 videos together, and then individual ideas for each video. Nothing was off limits. The sketches and ideas were ridiculous. Clearly, none of us could draw, and even if you can draw, there's not much you can do in a minute. We were laughing, the pressure was off, and we just drew pages and pages of these ridiculous stick figures. It's a work of art, really. Even though 95% of what you get in these things is useless, it was so much fun. It took a bland brief and it made it chaotic and unpredictable. And we ended up bringing all kinds of things from it into the final. Like using lost socks to describe consolidating lost super. Or using pizza to describe different investment options. I even got to jam some waves in there. This project showed me two things. First, we don't have to treat everything so serious, and when we don't, strange things can happen. And secondly, that any brief can be an opportunity to play, even something as boring as superannuation 101. Play is different for everyone. I did some extensive research for this talk. I went and asked as many people in the industry as I could what play was to them. 6 people in total. And I got a wide spectrum of responses that I wasn't really expecting. For Kyle, our Unreal and Houdini wizard, he said that solving technical problems, wrangling complex Houdini scenes, and digging into the code is what feels like play to him. That blew my mind, as dealing with code just really leaves me wanting to cry in the corner, basically. For our color specialist, CG designer Annie, play for her is in that look dev phase, experimenting with lighting and materials. For our king of iteration, Matt, who pumps out about 1,000 tests a day, he finds his real-time experiments when he's VJing at gigs on the weekend playful because of that instant feedback you get, and also the early stages of look dev and lighting. For Harry, it's when he knows exactly what he needs to do. He said that if he has to dive into learning a new technique, it feels less like play. While Dean, our art director, literally said the opposite. Learning new stuff always feels like play. For me, it changes daily. I can't settle on anything for very long. But at the moment, it's that thinking at the start, solving the puzzle of the brief and something that ticks all the boxes, but is still something exciting that you want to work on. And once you have that thing that's working, making 1,000 versions and picking the best takes. And making beats on my MPC. I've got to play in all kinds of weird and wacky worlds working in this field. I got to make some ridiculous music using only bike bells and locks with some singing over the top. Probably never got to test that on a sound system this big. Arranging some post-it notes for a storyboard with some of my best friends, and then animating giant killer tomatoes for it. And then driving through the emotions of a breakup, imagining what that would look like. So how do we create an environment for play? Well, my partner works in childcare, so I asked her for some tips, and I found that these things apply really well for design. Thanks, Emma. She said that on Bush Kinder, first they do a boundary walk with the kids, and the kids help the educators decide where it makes sense to place a boundary. I think in design, our boundary is the overall task. What's the brief asking us to do? They talk about what's okay and what's not okay. You can play with sticks, but you can't hit each other with them or run with them. For us, these are the do's and don'ts in the brief. You can change the color of the logo, but if you stretch that thing, there'll be hell to pay. And finally, she's found that with a restricted number of things to play with, the kids are more imaginative with what they've got. And I think this is key. These are the restrictions in a project. A limited color palette or a particular mood board we need to live within. So we have our brief, our do's and don'ts, and our restrictions, giving us our space to play. That's how my partner sets up the kids for play, but I think in a work context, there's a few other things that can really help. No wrong answers, especially at the start. Just hammering out all those dud ideas early, as it might lead to something better, and you can always just put them in the bin folder. Suspend the pressure. Somehow you need to trick yourself and into forgetting about the deadline. I like to do a really intentional breath out and grab a glass of water. Or play some Rage Against the Machine. Keep your scene files light and quick so that you can iterate really quickly. Find the breaking point. You need to stretch those rules and boundary and see how far you can go with it, and you can always come back later. Hoard now, cull later. You never know which ideas you'll love tomorrow morning. And I like to try and imagine what's the coolest thing that I could fit into the format, and then see if I can twist it into the brief after that. This was one of those glitches you get from Illustrator when it crashes. I wanted to see it up on the big screen. There's so much amazing detail in it. Imagine if all the software we use gave us art when it crashed. I'd have shitloads from that latest cinema. I've got a couple of projects where it really feels like I found that feeling of play, and these principles that I've just talked about really ring true in these projects. I just want to say there's some intense op art stuff coming up, so if anybody's suffering from photosensitive epilepsy, might want to sit this one out. Sorry. The first project I want to talk about is definitely the most bizarre one to land in the inbox while I was freelancing. And it's hard not to talk about this project because it's undoubtedly the biggest thing that's happened in my career thus far. I somehow won the Pinterest lottery. An underground UK hip-hop festival trailer with about 1,000 views on Vimeo had somehow landed in front of somebody at Super Union, now called Design Bridge, who was working on the first identity refresh of the UK TV channel BBC Two in 20 years. Somehow, this little side project that I'd done on weekends and weeknights for free had made it as a key reference for one of the moods in this identity that they were working on. It's insane that this happened, and I didn't fully realize the gravity of it at the time. I'm so thankful they didn't reveal all the collaborators involved because I think that pressure I would have just crumbled. This guy, working from this co-working space with that lamp, desperately needing a haircut, was working on a project with some of my favorite studios and designers, The Mill, Mainframe, David McLeod, even Aardman. The overall idea for the brand refresh was never not stimulating. A living identity with an ever-changing mood that would match their vastly diverse content, and they would use match cuts to transition from mood to mood. I was assigned 2 moods, thought-provoking and authoritative. I'll leave authoritative for the next Node talk. This mood was to be used for documentaries that force you to take another look at something you thought you knew. Shows that tackle provocative and timely issues, embrace debate, and show unorthodox viewpoints. They really wanted this one to be bold and stick out among all the other moods. So there's our boundary. Then there was a 2 curve it needed to match. There were incredibly strict timings for how long it could move before it needed to come back to that 2 curve. And there was a big deck of guidelines with lots of ticks and crosses for what was working with their initial explorations with Future Deluxe. So there were the do's and don'ts. Don't stretch the logo. And finally, there's a mood board, a nice, super restrictive palette, black and white, op art inspired, with one of my references in it. There's our restricted toy supply. My God, dream brief. We've got a super tight boundary, a massive deck full of do's and don'ts, and a tiny little box of toys to play in. So I got started, and I did what most motion designers probably do when they get their dream brief. I went for a long walk with the Notes app open on my phone. I love this stage of the project, just taking in the brief really slowly and just writing all the ridiculous things that pop in your head. There were some nice ones here. I think it was for the authoritative brief. Hairy banana, lottery inside a pill or something, swirling bananas. What could be more authoritative than swirling bananas? Unfortunately, they didn't go with that one, but hopefully for the next ident. Then jumping into cinema. Played with lathes, turning the 2 curve into landscapes, twisting it, stretching it, embracing that flat luminance shader. Who needs lights, right? trying to build impossible shapes, which it turns out are way more impossible than I thought. I presented 3 rough directions. They picked one that they were preferring, and I kept playing. Then I stumbled across this twisty shape with this camera moving around it, and instantly it felt really exciting to me. Even though it wasn't perfect, it was close enough to that 2 curve I could see that I could wrangle it into shape. And the biggest part was that you could quickly iterate on it and just change a few things and then create many different takes. They liked it, but wanted to keep exploring, which of course I was keen to do. Created this fun dancing egg cup out of the 2 curve, twisting it in a few different ways, trying more minimal op art compositions. It's a bit like the Coke logo or something. Twisting that focal length to numbers that probably doesn't want to go. Some of these were definitely breaking the rules from before, but it's just good to keep that momentum going, and you might find something right on the edge that you can bring back in after. By this point, you start getting a bit loopy and creating frames like this. Eventually, we came back to that shape from before. I was stoked. I knew I could make this one work and really go to town playing with it. So then I made over 50 variations of the thing, twisting it and stretching it in as many ways as I could think of while still having it fit those timings. Sharp corners, smooth corners, many twists, no twists, flag deformers. My favorite effect in After Effects, CC Collider, even made a star appearance. I used about 20 bend and twist deformers to wrangle it into that perfect curve. This allowed us to choose the best of them and create a longer ident so that you might stumble across different sections of it occasionally and maybe see one that you hadn't seen before. We refined it, tweaked it for months, and then finally sent it off. Too easy. I'll just show a couple of them. Too easy. Not quite. I should mention a slight detour that happened on the project. 3 easy tips on how not to van life. My partner and I had been planning a 6-week road trip in a van straight after the BBC 2 project. My partner had taken the time off work, we had the van fully packed, but the project wasn't quite finished. We were still making some lighting tweaks and timing changes. I knew these tweaks could go on for months, and there's not many times in life where everything aligns to allow for a road trip like that. So rather than cancel the trip or delay it, we decided to take it to the road. #van life. Tip number 1, don't camp hours away from mobile reception. You can't assume you'll have easy access to mobile reception anywhere on Vancouver Island, really. You can very easily find yourself in a spot hours away from anything, and rather than taking in the scenery and the beautiful serenity of the place, you're just planning how you're next going to charge your laptop. I remember at this point, I overheard some people saying as they walked past, "Why would you bring your laptop to a spot like this?" It was an excellent question. Tip number 2, load up on data. At one point in the trip, we were staying at a house at the very tip of Haida Gwaii, which is way up north, and it basically looks onto Alaska. Despite what it said, the house didn't have Wi-Fi. And mobile reception is kind of tricky to come by on that spot on the island. So this spot was from a moment where I had to drive 20 minutes to find 2 bars of reception out the front of a military base, and I tried to attempt to upload what could have been the final version. I had 6 gig of data, and that cost $80 at the time. 2 gig left at this point, just crossing my fingers that Dropbox didn't crash. It did upload, but of course it wasn't the final version. And number 3, BYO workspace. Despite what you might think, you can't guarantee you'll have a nice spot to work from on a ferry, or that there'll be a nice spot away from the bed to leave your laptop to render overnight when you're doing a last-minute Airbnb booking to do those fresh round of changes. Here's my partner going through that render hell trying to sleep. All in all, it ended up one of the best trips of my life, and we didn't end up sending the finals until I was back, so I very easily could have missed the whole trip if we delayed it until final approval. So what did we learn from all this? No idea. It was a hell of a trip though. Team play. Another project that had this element of play was a LifeSpace partnership with the Australian Open that we worked on at Future Deluxe for this year's Open. This one had a larger team. Here's the crew involved. At Future Deluxe, on most projects we work on, everybody's jumping in and out of scenes, trading assets, lighting setups, and materials constantly. So every project you see is absolutely a team effort with so many people's fingerprints on it. For the brief, LifeSpace wanted to show all the elements in the gut microbiome running in harmony in an approachable, tactile way, with our hero piece of gut bacteria being none other than a tennis ball. So there's our boundary. We had a mock-up supplied and a rough storyboard for reference. There's our do's and don'ts-ish. Then we had a few references supplied by the client and a horrendous color palette that we needed to fit into. Now it's time to play. For a project like this, there's so many questions to solve at the start. How do we take the references and storyboard and then build a unique, fully animated custom world from it? Well, you can't tackle it all at once, so everybody tackles these early stages differently. Harry started testing different materials, using the references as inspiration and just playing with some initial forms. Playing with lots of hair setups, as we knew that was going to be a huge part of this project. Harry's an awesome modeler, so we started creating a set of goodies that we could all then draw from for the rest of the project. For me, jumping into a project like this, I really like to dissect the brief, seeing if there's interesting ways to combine the microbiome world with tennis, and just bashing together quick pages of references and ideas of how we might do that. Looking at the shape language from the Landor rebrand that they did of the Australian Open and seeing if we can bring in those shapes from the rebrand, looking at the lighting from the court, and just bashing together quick pages of storyboards to see if we can elevate the supplied storyboard. I was coming off a Houdini binge, so I was keen to see what I could do with some vellum stitching and see if we could create an interesting tennis ball with this. Then testing some materials and quick layouts and see if it comes across that it's a tennis ball. Probably not. Starting to build out some temp shapes and test some lighting. This tennis ball turned out more like a catcher's mitt, I think. Matt dove into objects, layouts, and materials all at once. Got some soft bodies, some hairy soft bodies there. He jumped into Houdini himself, making some magical rocks, some spiderweb hair, some glowing slimy worms, smashing some bacteria with a tennis racket, integrating the shapes into the court lines. We all started playing around with how the tennis ball could look. There's so many ways you can style a tennis ball's hair. Scruffy dog. Dreadlocks. I think this one was my favorite. The first deliverable was a key visual to be used across the print campaign, so we all jumped into that. I started using some of Harry and Matt's shapes and materials and just testing different ways that we might be able to bring the court lines in, whether that's through light or as an object in the scene, maybe as an opening that they could all enter from, trying different lighting setups with different moods, seeing if we could bring the shape language from the 3D forms into the typeface. Harry and Matt also jumped on the key visual, with Rich Nosworthy jumping in for some last-minute help on some presentation scrambling. We settled on 4 variations, and they picked one, and we were off to the races. Then we started looking at how it could move. Jordan Booker jumped into this project at this point, helping us flesh out the animatics, and we all just started testing out different animation languages to see what fits. And after that, it's just many rounds of refining of the lighting and materials and just finding those perfect things that fit the brief and feel interesting. Here's where we ended up for the director's cut. Who would have thought that a probiotic ad could be so much fun? So nice to have a proper sub. Future play. Future play is a time at Future Deluxe for us to experiment and try new things. The purpose of it is to ensure we're always pushing forward with new techniques, exploring fresh ideas and searching for unexpected and new aesthetics. There's a few rules giving us a bit of a box to play in. It has to be something that's new to you. It doesn't have to be something totally groundbreaking in the industry, but it should be something that you haven't tried and want to explore. It can be research, conceptual development, aesthetics, motion tests, tutorials, software explorations, basically anything that's related to the field you work in. And findings must be shared. It doesn't have to be Instagram-friendly finished posts. It can be play blasts or sometimes just write-ups of what you've been working on. Here's a flick through of what's been popping up in the channel in the last little while. The goal is 2 days per month, but it flexes a bit when things are quiet or busy. But having this high priority placed on experimenting in the downtime has been incredible. You've always got something to jump into rather than spinning wheels on projects when you're waiting for feedback. It's such an inspiring, overwhelming, and really mind-blowing collection of experiments and tests and thinking. So much of which ends up being drawn on directly for pitches and new business and marketing Future Deluxe. It's like an infinite treasure trove of custom references. Lots of crazy Houdini stuff in there. Some wild camera mapping. This guy 3D printed a light, Jake, in New York. Some sculpting, AI to L systems, intense landscapes. So much wild shit. To start in this intimidating channel, I gave myself a tiny little box for my brief. It must be black and white, use reflections and refractions. I just wanted to see where it would take me. There's something so therapeutic about just diving in and making things after you've been on intense client projects. It took me to all kinds of weird places that I'd love to continue exploring down the track. Weird creatures, trippy landscapes, sharp landscapes, sinking landscape, all kinds of patterns. These patterns can then be expanded into their own things. On the right here is an idea for some future contact lenses. Living in London, I was really missing surf, so I brought some waves into Future Play. Started dabbling in Substance Painter and testing some sculpting in Cinema 4D. I started digging into new software. My good friend Will Denning, Pop and Chop for those playing at home, was giving me an introduction to Houdini by drawing out the key ideas on a food wrapper here. It's been awesome getting to suck up so much knowledge from the team around me. Everybody's very generous with their knowledge. I used Houdini to make some more waves, of course. I want no part of that wave. Playing with some volumes and hair, throwing around inflatables, playing with some crazy clouds, and then wrestling Houdini to try to render the things. The latest Future Play experiments have been around color and resolve. It's such a mysterious world, and it's been awesome getting to dive in. I'm really excited to learn more about it. And I've already been able to use it a little on live projects. Of course, there's lots of failures. I can feel the heart rate just in the room going. We're all constantly learning from each other's experiments in our weekly wrap-ups and on the Global Future Play channel. You really don't want to miss anyone's posts. So a quick note to studio owners from somebody with absolutely no context of running a studio who shouldn't be giving advice to studio owners. Giving space for your team to play or even just embracing it for the quiet periods can pay all kinds of dividends. From keeping the people on your team and attracting the people you want, to giving you content to post, to the team learning new skills and being able to work more efficiently. Not to mention it helps in staff sanity after those infinite client feedback projects. It helps with professional development and giving people confidence in their skills. And it beats working on case studies for award entries. And it beats sitting around feeling guilty when there's no projects assigned in the quiet periods. I really don't think this feeling of play has to stop at the projects we're on either. There's opportunities to flip all aspects of work, from the hours to the location to the roles we're in. I've been incredibly fortunate to have been able to stretch work-life balance to its extremes over the last few years. But hopefully it might inspire some thoughts for studio owners and freelancers around what playing with that work-life balance might be in your context. We can flip the hours. It can be small, like just shifting the workday an hour or two so people can get some light in the dark of winter. Maybe go for a run while it's light. Or it can be more drastic. For a short period while I was freelancing, I had a client on a different time zone. So I shifted my workday to match their time zone, which meant I was working from 2:30 p.m. till 10:30 p.m., 2 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. This worked really well as I was around for the client's full workday. It also conveniently meant I got to play outside during the day. It feels so obvious, but if we're present at check-ins and we complete the work each day, does it really matter what hours we're working? We can play with location. For years now, the question of where we can work has been exploded open, with so many possibilities for the studios willing to embrace it. I was really lucky to stumble into working at Future Deluxe in London. I made so many lifelong friends and learnt a ton along the way. We eventually moved because my partner and I realized that living in the city didn't really suit us long term. And we wanted to be closer to family after COVID, which led us down here. I'm fully living out surf-obsessed 15-year-old Conlan's dream of living at the beach, a far cry from the streets of Dalston. Future Deluxe has embraced bringing people on from all over. We've got 3 of us in Victoria and 1 in Japan, letting people work where they either love or need to live, rather than where they're forced to live just for work. Although I do miss the studio vibes, I love coming up to Sydney and hanging with the crew, and I'll keep trying to convince Kyle to come down for another surf. If anybody is out Geelong Surf Coast way, hit me up. Let's get a meetup going. And finally, we can play with the roles. As designers, there's so many fields that can use our skills, so many different disciplines we can dive into. Over my 10-year career thus far, I've shifted from web design in the beginning to 2D motion and brand design at Interbrand and Future Brand, to a hybrid of 2D, 3D, my 3D adolescent phase. And now I'm mostly working on 3D projects, with many more decades worth of pivots, twists, and play to come, hopefully. While it might not be the quickest or most straightforward way to run a career, I think with my itchy feet, it wouldn't have worked any other way. I love that feeling of knowing nothing in a new field, the early wins you get when you're learning, and being able to use all this disparate knowledge to add unique perspectives to what we're working on. Even at Future Deluxe, I'm a motion designer, but it goes from editing to previs to comp to sound design, reference hunting, music sketches. I want to keep playing with all these aspects of work and life. I feel like there's more unexpected awesomeness hidden in the cracks. So in summary, everybody's play is different. For some of you, it's wrangling the trickiest technical scenes. For others, it's crafting the best Gantt chart the world has ever seen. Listening to what feels like play can help you make the most of that part in the process, rather than just letting it rush by. Play can come from any brief, from the driest of superannuation videos to probiotic ads to the biggest projects of your life. So to inject play into the process, we need a boundary, do's and don'ts, and restrictions. The more, the better. We can play with hours, location, and roles. Injecting some play back into the process, whether on live projects or setting our own boundaries for chaos on side projects, can lead to not only unexpected and surprising results, but it can also help us find new techniques, new software, and roles we want to dive into down the track. So take a breath, forget you got a deadline in a week, and create some chaos. Thanks.